So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. Thank you very much for joining us today to our third MRD Talk entitled, How Can Social Innovations Contribute to Local Mountain Economies? Learnings from Science and Practice. In this interactive dialogue, authors from the journal Mountain Research and Development, as well as other practitioners and researchers, will share inspiring experiences of social innovations from different mountain regions. And we will reflect together on how such innovations can be fostered for the benefit of mountain economies. This MRD talk is part of the PRIMA project, promoting innovations in mountain areas, which is led by UNEP and funded by the Austrian Development Agency. Next slide, please. So this event is organized in two parts. During the first part, we will have a series of very interesting presentations by 5 different panelists. And in the second part, we will have a discussion organized in breakout groups and then a plenary about the learnings we can have from these experiences. Next slide. So I would like now to introduce our first presentation, which will be done by Annalena Stettler and Heike Meyer. They are both from the Institute of Geography and Center for Regional Economic Development of the University of Bern. The research which they will present was part of Annalena's master's thesis, and Heike is a professor of economic geography at the University of Bern. Their presentation is entitled Social Innovations and the Mountain Economy, the Case of 100% Valposchiavo and its Influence on Small and Medium-Sized Enterprise. The floor is yours, Heike and Annalena.
Thank you very much, Saralan, for introducing us. I will share my screen and I hope it works. If it doesn't work, if you don't see the first slide, let me know.
We see it. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, Annalena and I will share the presentation. I will make the start and then Annalena will take over. What we did in our study was we looked at a specific social innovation, an initiative in a mountain region in Switzerland. And this initiative is called 100% Valposchiavo. And it is aimed to close economic value chains in the agricultural sector and to create economic value, especially for participating small and medium-sized businesses. And the region, Valposchiavo, is quite a remote region for Swiss standards. It's located in the southeast corner. Here you see that on the map on the lower right corner. It's on the border to Italy. And it's quite remote from the major urban centers. What's unique about the region is that the agricultural structure is heavily focused on organic production, and that has been the case for a long time. But the region also faces the typical mountain region challenges, such as depopulation, young people are moving away, an aging population as a result, and a lack of economic development opportunities. And so local actors, and Annalena will explain later, initiated a process that created an initiative that we identify as a social innovation. And we were interested in tracing the history of the social innovation 100% Valposchiavo, but we were also interested in examining the effects on economic development, and especially on the question whether such a social innovation can create economic independence or dependence. Since in the scientific field of social innovation studies, there's not much work on economic effects of social innovations. But let me first define what we mean by social innovation. In our study, we took sort of a comprehensive definition. A social innovation consists of new forms of cooperation between individuals or organizations that lead to new ideas. And these new ideas have a positive impact on society. They can improve quality of life and or change social or power relationships. Perhaps to illustrate more with a graphic, you see this new form of partnership here on the left with a sort of cooperation between the civic society actors, academia, the public sector, or the private sector. This leads to a new idea. The new idea is also implemented. That's the part of the innovation. And the part of social innovation is that this innovation can lead to improvements in quality of life. Here, you see that with this rainy cloud, you move up to the sunny area, or it can also lead to changes in power relationships, the lower part with the sort of the queen that steps down from her throne and hands over the power to the civic society. This is just a sort of an illustration what we mean by social innovation. So I hand over to Annalena. She will explain to you the history of the social innovation, 100% Val Poschiavo, and then she will introduce you to our results.
Yeah, hello, welcome also from my side. I just want to quickly give you a short overview of the project 100% Val Poschiavo. So the project or the goal of the project is to promote the cross-sectoral cooperation among producers, processors, and the catering and hotel industry for creating synergies and safe resources, which means that locally produced sources are, for example, produced to flour, and the flour is then produced to bread or pasta or spaghetti, and then these are sold, for example, to hotels and the catering industry or the retailer, and therefore you have closed value chains in the valley. So that's the goal of this project of the 100% Val Poschiavo. So there are three very important prerequisites in the valley. The first one is that there is a quite wide range of climatic conditions, which means the highest point in the valley is over 3,000 meters above sea level, and the lowest is around 800, which means you have quite a wide variety regarding the climate, the temperature, which allows also to produce a lot of different sources. As well, the valley is quite remote, which means that there still exists a broad economic range. Additionally, there's a high amount of organic farming. So then you can see here in 2009, the problematization started. That means that the local energy provider wanted to build a huge pump storage plant between the two lakes above over 2,000 meters of height difference, which would mean that the local farmers would lose a lot of agricultural land. So they weren't at all amused about this development, and therefore were thinking about what could we change. If we can't increase the quantity, we could probably increase the quality. And that was the start of the project. So they established a working group, and finally in 2013, they launched the social innovation. It was from the beginning on supported from the Federal Office for Agriculture in Switzerland, which was quite important also for the financial support. Also, they joined a new tourism director who was really motivated with this project and helped to push it forward. They also developed then two brands, Val Suin and 100% Val Poschiavo, for products either just produced in Val Poschiavo or produced only based with sources from the local valley. The project can be divided into two parts. There is the enterprise-specific part, where you have all the enterprises which are part of the project, and they also had the possibility to receive financial support, for example, for renovation of their infrastructure. As well, there's a collaborative part, and in this collaborative part, there was a common marketing strategy with the goal of a high quality marketing for the valley. So 2020, the implementation started, and they also hired new staff. Up to now, they're in the implementation, so there are still constructions and everything is still growing. And they have as a goal for 2025 or later of founding a limited liability company. Also, they want to designate the valley as the first biological valley worldwide. And they just implemented a B2B platform for the possibility to also sell the products to other businesses at the outside of the valley. So one slide further. So when we took a look at this project, we remarked that the social innovation has also a growth independent effect. So therefore, I just want to present you shortly what this growth independence is. Growth independence is the society's, economies, and institutions' ability to execute their vital function while no longer being existentially dependent on economic growth. We defined then economic growth as the ratio of the total output of a national economy to its monetary output. This kind of development allows more sustainable development because you're not anymore reliant on the economic growth. And yes, this is really important also for the resilience of rural mountain economies. We then use those 4 characteristics, which are also part of very important characteristics of the social innovation, which then can kind of combine the 2 concepts of social innovation and growth independence. This is the relocalization of value chains, support the local market, decommercialization in means of including the consumers as prosumers, and therefore you can better fit the different products for the consumer's need. Then the capital has also a growth effect, which means that debt capital help to grow, and therefore it aims the growth independence to has a low amount of debt capital. And finally, also the self-governance, which means growth independent enterprises and social innovations most often take place in small and medium-sized enterprises. So here you can see the table of our result. We tried to fit everything in a table. Here on the left side, you can see the most important findings. Up here, you see the different enterprises where we looked for. Those were hotels, cooperative, berry producers, bakery, butcheries, a bit of everything in the valley. And on the other side, you see those 4 characteristics. We then took at every enterprise a deep look and decided if it, for example, the enterprise use the regional and local market, if it is relocalized, and so on. So we found out that the enterprises increased their relocalization due to the project 100% Valpo-Schiavo. There was also a decreased effort of advertise and marketing, which means that because there was a common marketing strategy, the project or the different enterprises decreased their effort into the marketing. But the initiative also increased the debt capital because they had the possibility to receive finance for doing renovations or construction. We then put all those, could you go one side? We then put all those enterprises into different, I would say, categories. So there were the growth dependent enterprises. Those are 2 of those, the 2 hotels, and then the growth independent, like for example, the restaurant and berry producer. In a further step, we then we're thinking about why are those enterprising and behaving like that. So you can see here the determinants for growth independence. This is as first close relationship between the different actors, the management age, so all the management or all the enterprises tend to grow less. Then the philosophy and also cooperatives tend to be more growth independent. The growth dependency is most often due to the debt capital, the demand which is still high and therefore the enterprises are growing. The young enterprises are also tend to grow more, and modernizations are also a reason for enterprises to start growing. Here you can see some recommendations which we developed for the policy and the practice. The first really important is that social innovations need to be recognized. They have a huge potential to help mountain regions to follow a non-traditional economic development path. Growth-independent effects of social innovation help also that the mountain economy is becoming more resilient. But finally, it is also really important that such initiatives receive professional and financial support for the initiative, which is then the key to success. So exactly, now we are already at the end and we are looking for some interesting questions.
Thank you so much, Anna-Lena and Heike, for this interesting presentation. We only have time now for one or two brief questions because we want to keep quite some time for a more interactive discussion in the second part of the webinar. I see that there is first, or maybe I will start with the last question by Dina Vashdev. Could you please elaborate on the self-governance part? What level of governance are you referring to?
Anna-Lena, this is Anna-Lena can be more specific, but the level of governance was mostly the level of the business, the enterprise. So to what extent are these small and medium-sized businesses involving sort of democratic aspects, whether they are cooperatives like the cheese dairy or other kind of cooperatives that are present. But Anna-Lena, you could maybe elaborate a bit more on that question.
Yeah, there are two of the enterprises. They were cooperatives where there was a high potential of the local to also have the possibility to create or to construct these enterprises, which then has a growth independence effect. Exactly. This was actually a point which, or in general, all the different enterprises, they had quite a high potential to that also other peoples can create there. They can go and say, yeah, we would like to have a product like that, and the local enterprise try to integrate all those ideas into their production.
Thank you very much. And then there were a couple of other questions from Ahmad Madawi, ones that are maybe more general, but maybe Heike and Anna could think in the case of the Swiss Alps, where you were working, how can such initiative respond to some of the global changes, including urbanization or the type of social economic changes in the region? I don't know if you can see the question. I will read it out to you. When mountains are attacked by buildings and mines, what innovations work better to reduce impacts? And there was also a question related to mountain products like fruits and veggies, and whether they are less polluted with pesticides as compared to the city products.
So actually the thing which is really special about this valley is that nearly all the agriculture is biological, which means that nearly all the farmers, they don't really use pesticides, or they try to reduce them as much as possible. Even some farmers, they still aren't biological. for example, the berry producer, but he has really the struggles that you need certain pesticides that you then can transport the berries, for example, to another part of Switzerland, because berries, they need to be consumed as fast as possible. And if you wait too long, it's not possible. So because the well is so remote, they need 1 day or so until they are kind of transported into a new destination. And I think such an initiative like we have here, which was really bottom up, so they were the locals which developed it, is really important that also the acceptance in the valley is high. So with all the people I spoke there, they were really they were proud. And actually it was also interesting because all the people, they said, yeah, it was actually me, and together with a friend, we had the initial idea. So up to now, it's not really, actually, I don't really got the clue who was the person who had the initial idea, because I think a bit everyone has the thinks that he had a really important piece for getting to the state where we are here. And I think such a development is really important.
Thank you very much for your response. I see there is another question by Paul Froning, and may I ask one of you to respond in the chat, because I would like now to invite the speaker and the panelists of our second presentation, Abid Hussein, who is senior economist and food systems specialist at ICIMOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development in the Himalayas. And his presentation is entitled, "Can Women's Group Play a Role in Climate Change Adaptation? The Case of Migrants Sending Households in Nepal." So, Abid, you're kindly invited to share a presentation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This case study from Nepal is a little bit different compared to the previous case studies. The main purpose of this intervention, its partners, they have done in Nepal, one of the district which is very vulnerable to flood. That district name is Udaipur. So the main purpose is to reduce the vulnerabilities of migrant sending households and to reduce their implicit costs. Mainly whenever we have some sort of economic intervention, we target to improve the benefits, but in this intervention, we targeted to reduce the costs. I hope that all of you are well aware of the context and the issues of Hindu Kush Himalayan region, and of course itself about the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. I will not give that much details. So Hindu Kush Himalayan region is, of course, like other mountain regions, is facing climate-induced impacts, particularly erratic precipitation, glacier melting, changes in temperature patterns. So a lot of areas in Hindu Kush Himalayan regions are facing flash floods. So the study district Udaipur is one of those districts in Nepal. That district is hilly and plain, mixed type of district. So in Hindu Kush Himalayan region, one of our ICIMOD survey, that was very large scale survey. We conducted around 20,000 households. We surveyed in 2012 and 2013. And another round we conducted in 2017. As per our surveys, 40% households in Hindu Kush Himalayan region have at least one migrant which migrated to other areas within same country or to other countries to improve their livelihoods and for better education and other services. So climate change is one of the drivers of rapid out migration. It's not the only driver. There are several other drivers also. So what happens in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, migration, out migration of particularly youth males have both positive and negative sides. So in terms of negative sides, out migration of youth is leading to labor shortages in agriculture. And of course, it's resulting in abandonment of agricultural land, having impacts on productivity and of course on food security. On the other side, out migration is also having positive side. So remittances are actually resulting in improved food purchasing power and of course preparation against flood hazards or other vulnerabilities caused by climate change or other changes. So one of the main thing out migration is resulting is actually leading to the workload of women. So women, they have to see agriculture and of course non-agriculture affairs of households also, particularly during the events of floods or prolonged droughts. They have to fetch water from far-flung areas. They have to take care of elderly and of course younger members of households. So it adds to their vulnerabilities also. So as I mentioned, Udaipur is one of the flood-prone areas in the east-south part of Nepal. So we wanted to see in the given situation, as I mentioned, given situation is that out-migration rate is very high in that district and women are facing workload, of course, because of out-migration of young male members from household. They are also having added vulnerabilities to climate-induced floods. So wanted to see if we organize women into group and we convince them, mobilize them to take collective actions, whether it results in improving their adaptive capacity or not. So for this purpose, we designed one experimental design of action research. We executed that design in 2014, and we concluded that research in 2017. We conducted both baseline and endline surveys. So in terms of surveys, we include both treatment and of course control households. The intervention was a kind of package. The first level of intervention was to form and mobilize the informal women groups, convince them to take collective actions. The second level of intervention was to create awareness among those groups, women groups, build their capacity on financial literacy and flood preparedness. And they were also convinced and they were mobilized to teach each other and also create awareness among their households. So in terms of sources of awareness, so there were three aspects we kept in mind during the dissemination of information or during the training of participant women. One was direct training of women by researchers or by ECMOD or its partner. We also brought on board the financial institutions like bank who conducted trainings on financial literacy, how they can open the account. If they don't want to open the account, how they can save money and maintain their household budgeting at home. We also brought on board the government public sector extension department. They also conducted training together with the CMO. So another level was facilitating the mutual learning, to convince the women to teach each other, whatever they learn. For example, some women, if they cannot participate in training, but they can learn from other women. Of course, third level was to train the women to teach their households also, because we wanted to see the impact at household level, not at the individual level. We use econometric models, difference in differences model, to assess the impact of our interventions. So there are 3-4 points which actually validated that our interventions contributed to local economies. One is very important point. We were able to tap the potential of social capital, intangible social capital. Of course, human sources, their skills, their learning are intangible social capital. We were able to organize women. They took collective actions. We improved their capacity on financial literacy and flood preparedness, and it worked well. The second aspect is we were able to improve the productive use of remittances. Whatever of that area is actually very poor and farmers are very small. Whoever is out of the country or other areas of Nepal, actually they are sending very minimal amounts of remittances. So women, they were able, the participant women, they were able to save some money out of that remitted money, and they used parts of that saved money, of course, for flood preparedness, to purchase the items related to water cleaning. They purchase the items to store the food. They purchase the items to store the water. So all these flood preparedness steps they took using the saved money. So another thing, reduce likelihood of economic cost. As I mentioned earlier, our main purpose was to reduce their economic cost, particularly the implicit cost. Some implicit cost we sometimes ignore to calculate directly. For example, food insecurity, impacts on health, infections because of water, dirty water. All these things we most of the time ignore in accounting system. So these are the implicit costs. Our main aim was to reduce their implicit costs. So overall intervention resulted in improved adaptive capacity of households for climate change induced floods. So some of the results I have put in the table. Sorry. So first one was financial literacy. In financial literacy, we trained women on several aspects. As I mentioned, the main purpose was to convince them to save some money out of their remittances, what they receive from out migrants. Our interventions showed a 22% increase in households who saved money. In terms of flood preparedness, indicators are variables, 55% increase in the number of households who saved money for flood preparedness. So overall preparedness steps, whatever they have taken. So in terms of particular steps on safe drinking water, 14% increase in number of households was calculated. In terms of preparation or maintaining the emergency kit, 33% increase in the number of households was calculated. Similarly, in terms of drinking water storage, 14% increase in the number of households was calculated as a result of interventions. Likewise, food storage, household who stored food before flood, it also increased. 14% increase in the number of households was calculated. Instead of these variables of interest, we also taken into account several control variables. I have put the list of those control variables, which were very important to control their effect, to accurately assess the impact of our interventions. You can see, so on the top left side, so the women who were receiving very small amount of remittances and they were not able to, or they were not convinced to open the bank accounts. So we provided that coin boxes to those women to save money. Mostly women, they used to use money for food consumption or very urgent type of items, but we convinced them, they started using some money, saving some money out of their remitted money. On the lower side, lower right side, you can see women, they are learning from virtual sources. We also prepare some sort of documentaries, and the guiding document is to train the women. So they are learning from laptop. You can see from videos how to filter the water, how to store food, how to store the water safely. So you can see women are also carrying the emergency kits, of course, prepared from not that much fancy stuff. They are using the bag. They prepare the emergency kits. You can see they are carrying. You can also see the river, which actually caused flood in that area. So overall, 3 policy messages are very important. So women, they have differential vulnerability, particularly the women, left behind women who from migrant sending household. As I mentioned earlier, because of out migration of active youth, so a lot of workload is on those women. They have to carry out the agriculture activities. They have to take care of elderly members of household. They have to take care of children also, particularly during the flood event. So customized social innovations and capacity building activities are required. We cannot take blanket approach for all type of household. Another policy recommendation is in social innovation, the promotion of women's peer-to-peer learning is very important. So whenever possible, we can conduct trainings for women, we can build their capacity, but it's always important if they learn from each other's experiences. It reduces their dependency on external sources, for example, extension services or some kind of intervention doers like Isimod or our partners they did. We wanted some sort of sustainability in the post-project period also. That's why we boosted this sort of promotion in the intervention area. Another thing, of course, peer-to-peer learning is important. Learning from each other's experience is important in social innovations, but we should not forget the importance of formal institutional services. If the formal institution service is also supporting knowledge, there are higher chances of sustainability after the termination of project in case of such sort of social innovations and capacity building programs. This is all from my side. I will be happy to respond if any questions are there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avid, for sharing this very, very interesting experience. I don't know if we have one brief question from the audience at this stage. We will, of course, have the opportunity to also discuss further about all these insights in the second part of the webinar. So if there is no specific question right now, I would like to invite our third presentation, Anna Shanchashvili, who is the founder of the Georgian Heritage Crafts Association in Georgia. And her presentation will focus on social innovations through heritage and nature-based crafts product development, a case study from Georgia. So Anna, please.
So hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be invited to speak to the audience. As it was mentioned, I represent Georgian Heritage Craft Association, and we'll be talking about another mountainous region in Caucasus, Georgia. Our case study is about how crafts can somehow create new opportunities and innovative approach to empower the communities in the mountains, and especially women, household women, which are based in the mountains of Georgia. So I'll just start with a few words about our association. It is a membership organization which at the moment unites about 300 artisans and organizations throughout Georgia. We started, it was founded in 2015, and since then the membership is expanding, and we are trying to reach out to the remote areas, especially in the mountains, to have the representation of all regions of Georgia in our association. So we started with the research, and it was in 2012, and as a part of research, we were asking about the needs of the makers, and of course the economic side of crafts was one of the key elements where they needed some help. So at the end of the research, we surveyed about 700 craft makers across Georgia, and we had all the data, and we had all the important key elements which in which they wanted us to support them, and the association actually was built upon all this information we gathered during the research. So we have many different directions. I'll just focus on several of them. We are trying to identify and document endangered skills. We have our YouTube channel where you can see all these short documentaries about the makers and how these and their stories. These are just shortly about different services we offer to our members. It's of course networking and coordination. It's a promotion, because promotion is a strong tool for the marketing of their products, and education, linking master artisans with young apprentices. trainings, consultations, research, and advocacy. Of course, all these are part of our daily activities. But I would like to focus on some of the main direction, which was chosen by us to be a main direction for the association, which is specifically about product development, transforming some of these products into a marketable product. So this was a key problem as we analyzed after the research, and empowering makers through these capacity building activities and supporting creation of new lines based on heritage and nature. This is the main topic for the presentation. So when we talk about product development, we mostly think about different elements which are a part of this process, and of course it has something to do with the design, and it has to introduce some of the functional categories, and of course introduce some qualities and standards. So these are the elements which are involved in this capacity building activities. So we have trainings, we have idea generation workshops, and we have then we have individual consultations. And sometimes we try to also provide with some materials if we have some kind of donor-funded project. So these are some examples of how we actually introduce some heritage motifs into the design. And these are the frescoes from the 12th century, which have been then transferred. These designs have been transferred to these felt bags and purses. These are some examples from Ajara, which is one of the regions in Georgia, mountainous regions, where we had an interesting project where we took the makers to the museum. So we had a museum study tour where they had the opportunity to see all these the artifacts and actually see them closely, and then all these elements have been transferred to different products. So this is it's not about copying, it's more about inspiration, taking inspiration from all these collections. This is another traditional pattern on one side, and there's a backpack which has this traditional pattern made in a traditional way. So it's a modern product, which is even I have this kind of a bag, and I use it every day. These are other type of embroideries, which then have been these nice, like naive designs have been transferred to the ceramic collections. And these are other examples of typical. We try to all the time focus on those elements which are typical for certain regions. And even though Georgia is a very small country, it has a wide diversity of regions. So each region has its specific ornaments and color combinations. So we all the time try to go back to these traditions and bring them back to the design. These are another examples of embroidery from inspired from the wooden wood carved ornaments, and other examples. We have different protected areas around Georgia. This is one of the very beautiful areas in Tusheti, the high mountainous region, and it has this beautiful variety of flowers from alpine meadows. So we try to collect all this information about specific flowers which grow there, and then integrate them into design. And all these elements, all these products come with the tags which actually talk about all this nature and flowers and how they've been used in traditional lifestyle. And these are all this how they look like. So this is our shop where we actually sell all these products, which are part of our capacity building program. And then all these products come to the shop. And of course, we have some online channels, selling channels, even some on Etsy and other type of online selling products. So all this money goes back to the members because they benefit from all this capacity building, and then they know where to sell the products, where to send them, because all this is a kind of a value chain which unites all our activities. Just to summarize some of the key recommendations. So why our association and this initiative is somehow successful is this, that we actually knew the real needs of and capabilities of the community because of this wide range of information we gathered through the research. So, and then the services the association provides are need-based. So these are not kind of the top-down top-down decisions we make, but these services and all our activities come from the needs of the community. And it's when we talk about innovation, it has a great potential to have a stronger impact if we go back to the local heritage and local nature, because it is more authentic. So when we try to use all these elements, it is much easier to convince the communities to innovate. So this is one of our key findings. And of course, a corporate ownership, which is a very important part of our association. It is very important to keep us, we feel that it is, we have this responsibility towards our members, and it's a kind of a constant innovation all the time. We continue work with our members in these mountainous areas, and of course with other organizations. We try to collaborate with wider sectors, with tourism, with education. So all these elements are part of our network. So, and of course, the most valuable, I think, recommendation would be that people are key to this kind of projects, because sometimes donors start with infrastructure, but infrastructure doesn't work without people. So the first thing to start with is, of course, people. And thank you for your attention. And now I'm going to show a video, which is a story of one of our beneficiaries. She comes from this mountainous region. Just a second.
მე ვარ მძევინარი რემაძე, შუშუმპირე. ცხოვრობ ხულოს რაიონის სოფელ ღორჯომში, აჭარაში ერთ-ერთი ულამაზესი სოფელია, სადაც არ არის დაკარგული ძველი ტრადიციები, ქსოვა, ქარგვა, კერვა. ჩვენ ძველებიც ბებია ქსოვდა, იქიდან გამომდინარე მეც ვისწავლე და ვქსოვდი. ოღონდ თავიდან მოყვარულის დონეზე ვქსოვდით, ჩუქნიდით. ჩვენ თვითონ ვიყენებდით, ართავდნენ მატყლს, მერე ფერებში ღებავდნენ და ქსოვდნენ. ახალ რძალს, ახალად რომ ინიშნებოდა გოგო თხოვდებოდა, იმას ატანებდით გზითში. წინდებს, ხელთათმანებს, ხალიჩებს, ფარდაკებს. 2017 წელს მოვიდა საქართველოს ტრადიციული რეწვის ასოციაცია, აჭარის კულტურის სამინისტრომ დაგვაფინანსა აჭარელი ოსტატები, წაგვიყვანეს აჭარაში მუზეუმებში, ხატონ ახვლეტიანის მუზეუმიდან ამოვიღეთ ეს ორნამენტები და ამ ორნამენტებზე შევქმნით ხელთათმანები და წინდები. დავდიოდით გამოფენებზე, ეს შემოსავლის წყაროდაც მეგვცა. ეს ძალიან კარგია. სოფელში თითქმის ყველა ქსოვს და კარგავს, მაგრამ აქ არის უფრო მეტად ფიზიკური მუშაობა, ყანა, ჭალა, ესეთი რაღაცები. რა თქმა უნდა, ეს ჩვენი კულტურა არის და მოგწონდა და ვაკეთებდით, მაგრამ ვაკეთებდით ცოტაოდენ ისე საჩუქრებად და ეგეთ რაღაცებად და მე ეს შემოსავლის წყარო გაჩნდა, ფიზიკურ მუშაობიდან შეგიძლია რომ გადმოერთო და თან შენი საყვარელი საქმე აკეთო და თან იყო შენი შემოსავალი. ეს ძალიან კარგია. ეტლით მოსარგებლისთვის აქ არის გადაადგილებაც კი რთული. ყველაფერი გატანა, გაყიდვა, მაგრამ როცა ამით შემოსავლის წყარო გაჩნდა, მიმიწვიეს გამოფენებზე, დავდიოდი გამიჩნდა სურვილი, რომ უფრო მეტად გამეუმჯობესებია, ჩავრთულიყავი ყველაფერში, გავსულიყავი სოფლიდანაც. იმიტომ რომ შემოსავლის წყარო რაც არის, უფრო მეტად გაქვს სურვილი, რომ აკეთო ბევრი. მის მერე გავიმარჯვე პროექტით, გავხსენი ატელიე და ჩემი დასაქმებიდან გამომდინარე დავასაქმე სხვებიც. ეხლა 4 ქალი მუშაობენ ჩემთან სამკერვალოში და ვემსახურებით სოფელს. შეზღუდული შესაძლებლობები არ არსებობს. ყველას ყველაფერი შეუძლია. ხელსაქმე მით უმეტეს. და თუ ეს ხელსაქმე იქნება მათთვის შემოსავლის წყარო, არ უნდა ჩაიკეტონ სახლში და ისინიც უნდა იყოს სხვისი მაგალითი, რომ გავაგრძელოთ ცხოვრება. დღეს მე ბევრი რამე შემიძლია და ვარ ბევრი ქალის ფეხზე მოსიარული. ეთლით მოსარგებლე კი არა, ფეხზე მოსიარული ქალის მაგალითიც. რომ მარტო არ არის ფიზიკური მუშაობა, სირთულეების გადალახვა, შეგიძლია მარტივადაც იცხოვრო ისე, რომ იყოს სხვისი მაგალითი და გააკეთო სხვაზე მეტი.
Thank you. So before, I'll just make a short comment about her story. Before that, she had absolutely no income other than the pension she gets from the government. And after this project, when she got involved in this product development and all this exhibition and sales, now you saw she has all this. She even opened her own atelier, and so she's very active now, and we are really proud of this story.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing this your experience in this video, this very nice video. There is a question in the chat for you by Dina Vashdev about the interest of the younger generation and how far does the younger generation value this cultural heritage, and would it continue to be so if there were no economic profits? Which you could briefly answer.
That's a very interesting question. Of course, young generation looks at the old generation. If the masters are valued in the society, if they get enough, they earn their income from their crafts, it is inspiring for them. So we have different cases where they have this kind of a role model, where they see all this, the respect from the society, the earnings. So all of them, they have young apprentices, and it is very popular to be engaged in this in several crafts. But of course, without economic side of this, it's impossible to even ask the masters that they have to continue this tradition, because this is the economic part is the vital part of this activities as well. It was always, and it is a historical function of crafts as well. So that's why it is very important to they have they know what they do, they know where to send, where to sell, and how to get back their income. So it's association in this terms. It is an organization which they trust, and so it's the most important thing is just building trust with the communities.
Thank you very much for these inspiring words. And now I would like to invite our last panelists with a fourth case from the Andes. So I would like to invite Stephen Sherwood, who is a rural innovation specialist at Eco-Rural in Ecuador. And he's also a lecturer at Wageningen University. And his presentation is entitled The 250,000 Families Campaign, Collapsing the Dichotomy Between Farming and Food. Steve.
Okay, hi, good morning. Let me share a screen. Okay, presentation up. Are we good?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And welcome to Ecuador. We're in the highlands. I've lived in Ecuador for 30 years. I'm married to a woman, a Purawa Quichua tradition from this part of the country, Chimborazo. Many of you might know it. And what I want to share today, in honor of the time, is our experience with responsible consumption and how the agroecology movement has kind of pushed this forward, this idea within this country. And it's been very exciting for me, both as an academic, but also as a farmer and activist. And one of the things I wanted to mention, since we're talking about policy here, is to think about policy also as a social process. So not just thinking of policy as being something that takes place in bureaucratic spaces, let's say through legislation, which is also very important. We can't ignore that. But also thinking of policy in its original form of determining course of action. And how can we determine course of action? In this case, through our daily producing, consuming, and other activities. And I'm not going to get into this very much, but one of the ways, and we've been using this with farmers and with our social activists because it helps them address some of the frustrations that you can feel as an activist. But one of the ways we think about it, and we share this, is using this kind of lazy 8 of C.S. Holling, and many have used this, but thinking of change as not being linear, but something that's built on legacies, the weaknesses of past legacies, and so the processes of convergence and resurgence, and how the contradictions of current institutional processes can create space for charismatic leadership and people to step up and promote new ideas that can be institutionalized. And we talk about sort of a historical perspective of change because often it can feel very overwhelming from within. And modernization was something that we view, at least in the highlands of Ecuador, as something that emerged out of the limitations of traditional farming, out of the limitations of the hacienda plantation systems that could not meet the demands in the middle 20th centuries of the growing cities. You had this charismatic leadership, right? That came out of industrial technologies during World War II and just after the war that promoted things like the tractor, total tillage, improved varieties, the use of fertilizers, the use of pesticides. And it was very successful in the beginning, right? And we don't want to deny that. It was institutionalized and led to new academia, led to research institutes, led to new industry, new forms of farming, new forms of eating. But it also has generated contradictions. And those contradictions have created space for change. I think many of you would be familiar with the global pesticide problem. Pesticides kill more people than wars and homicides combined. That's an unwanted bad. As we produce the goods of technology, we also generate some bads, and we need to address those. And the other one is processed foodstuffs, ultra-processed foodstuffs, ironically. And we see that as something that has emerged out of a new innovative process, right? The emergence of an industry that has been organized around exclusivity and creating technologies that can't easily be reproduced, let's say from the farm. And ultra-processed foodstuffs have created a situation where chronic disease is now the leading cause of death on the planet, right? In Ecuador, it's 24% of all deaths. More people die from food, right, than die from hunger in terms of overweight, obesity, and chronic disease. And that's something we have to think about. But also we're concerned about this systematic undermining of ecologies, right? What we've done with modernization in terms of work undermining biomes, soils, aquatic systems, the oxidation of carbon in the biosphere, global warming, et cetera. So agroecology, we very much see as something that emerged thanks to those contradictions, right? The space and the need for new ways of being. And I'm not going to go very much into agroecology, but I'll say in Ecuador, in 2012, we had a big meeting where we were reflecting and we were frustrated that agroecology was not growing. And we concluded that we're too focused on agronomics. We've isolated rural mountain people by focusing too much on agronomy. And we needed to start finding ways of connecting them with people who eat their products. In Ecuador, they feed 65% of what people actually eat in Ecuador, yet they did not know those people. So how could we connect rural people with urban people? Okay, and that's when the responsible consumption campaign was born. And what it was, the way we thought about it was looking for a critical mass. In this case, 5% of the Ecuadorian population, 250,000 families, who spend $650 million a year, right, in food and beverages, of the $20 billion food economy in the country. So we didn't want external money to come in. We wanted a shift of the existing resources. And how could those resources be put into the hands of people who eat and people who produce in ways that are mutually interesting? And that's how we plan to finance it. So we didn't want to show that agroecology or responsible consumption was possible. We wanted to show that it already existed and how, if on the margins, right, of society. Okay, I'm just going to show a bit of this to give you a feel for some of the key actors. What is responsible consumption?
El consumo responsable es la oportunidad que tenemos todos y todas de influir mediante nuestro poder de compra en la política mundial, es decir, de construir el futuro que queremos para la humanidad.
El consumo responsable tiene que ver con dejar de pensar en cadenas rectas de producción que terminan en basura y comenzar a pensar en ciclos de producción en donde nosotros también somos transformadores y productores de vida.
El consumo responsable inicia con una pregunta. ¿Qué estamos comiendo? ¿De dónde vienen nuestros alimentos? ¿Y quién está produciendo nuestros alimentos? ¿En qué condiciones viven?
Why is responsible consumption important?
Es un acto de responsabilidad política, de responsabilidad social y sobre todo de responsabilidad con el mundo que queremos de.
El consumo responsable es porque ciertos alimentos están desapareciendo, ¿no?
Yo compro la canasta orgánica porque me permite disfrutar la comida ecuatoriana y también comer de manera más diversificada que normalmente.
How do you practice responsible consumption?
Bien, hace 14 años formamos una organización de consumidores. Cada 15 días hacemos una compra colectiva de alimentos. Los adquirimos directamente a agricultores orgánicos, ecológicos, y de esa manera alcanzamos ahorro, nuestros agricultores perciben un pago justo y nos alimentamos sanamente con productos de nuestra propia tierra.
Nosotros tenemos un restaurante que tiene una pequeña huerta agroecológica, nos proveemos de productores locales y tratamos de crear vínculos entre quienes comen y quienes producen para que la gente sepa el origen de sus productos.
Oh, y ahora, ¿qué cocinaremos mañana? Esa es la frase que usamos al terminar un programa de cocina radial a nivel nacional por Radio Pública de Ecuador. ¿Y qué cocinamos? Sano, rico y de nuestra tierra.
Bueno, lo que yo hago es rescatar este tipo de alimentación autóctona nuestra por medio de las semillas y bueno, que obviamente las conservamos y las preservamos y las intercambiamos.
Para practicar el consumo responsable, por ejemplo, yo he construido mi casa en bioconstrucción con materiales naturales. También trabajo con semillas, ayudando a gente que produce semillas ecológicas. También hago jabón junto con mi esposa y lo vendemos en el circuito económico local y compro en ese circuito económico para dar también apoyo a los compañeros que producen aquí.
Nosotros reciclamos agua, cosechamos agua de la lluvia. También reciclamos todos los desechos que existen de la finca y las volvemos a poner en compost para las plantas. Y también entregamos directamente vegetales a nuestros amigos que no los vemos solamente como consumidores.
¿Comes?
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 ¿Eres parte de una familia? ¿Eres parte de una familia?
¿Eres parte de una familia?
¿Cómo practicas el consumo responsable?
¿Cómo practicas el consumo responsable?
¿Cómo practicas el consumo responsable?
Únete al movimiento.
Únete al movimiento. Únete al movimiento.
Únete al movimiento.
Únete al movimiento.
Okay, let's see if I can get out of this and back to my presentation. Okay, so now I just want to end because we have limited time. There we go. So what we primarily did in terms of achieving this was, this is done through the Colectivo Agroecológico, a network of about 200 to, well, 400 organizations. Some of these organizations have up to 10,000 members, so it can be quite big. And an urban-based, a Movimiento de Economía Social y Solidaria, sort of an urban food solidarity movement. And a lot of it was about communications, building a website, a bi-weekly bulletin, which promotes other people's activity in the country, allowing people to learn about this, creating this national radio public program and other online means that give a voice to these existing programs. So we didn't really lead it. As we did, we connected and we sort of gave oxygen, right, to existing activities. And everybody was very supportive of the notion that we were trying to help them achieve their own objectives. And we helped to create an online guide of these enterprises throughout the country. And what we found that was exciting for us, for rural people, was to learn about the power of these alternative food networks. This is the city of Quito, for example, and I won't go into the research here, but one of the things that we found when we studied what we call healthy consumption, we use anthropometrics, we study what people eat, we do blood tests about the presence of chronic disease. We find that where there is health, you find these sort of alternative food networks. We don't know if the networks create them or if they're beneficiaries. It's sort of, but they're present. They're part of the dynamic. And we find these in these so-called red areas of rampant irresponsibility, so to speak, of overweight, obesity, of chronic disease, and et cetera. But these networks are key and very important. And that was interesting, not just to build our economy, but to help us be more relevant in modern society. Okay. Now, I want to end. So some of the impacts, we did not achieve our goal of 250,000 families. It's an open-ended campaign. We have about 20,000 that are closely articulated. We hope it's exponential. COVID sort of cut things quite quickly. We could talk about that, but it ruined some of our dynamic. We learned about the power of these alternative food networks, and we created a lot of collaborations. In terms of the formal policy realm, we've had huge impacts of preventing genetically modified organisms to exist in the country at the constitutional level, but also at the legal level, by working with the food-based food guide, which is now national policy, intervening in the seeds law, the organic health standards throughout the country, and many other policy areas. There's no way as farmers we could have done that without the leadership and the help of the people situated in the city. And the other thing that's been very powerful has been our ability to respond to crises. Like Nepal and other countries, we've had powerful earthquakes. In Georgia, you've had violent uprisings and wars, and we've had something similar in Ecuador, maybe not to the same degree, but for example, in October 2019, June 2022, we've had these huge uprisings where the rural people have marched in the capital, many indigenous people, to demand their rights. And one of the things that was very exciting for us as farmers, but also the urban people, is how we mobilized to feed up to provide up to 100,000 meals in these two events with no money, right? And no pre-warning, and how we mobilized, liquidated the farms, how we created these transportation networks, had volunteers in the streets, in these street kitchens, to support these indigenous protesters who had arrived in the capital, who had no food and had to survive in the streets for 2 weeks. That could not have been done prior to this campaign and all the relationships that were created. Okay, so ending with some recommendations. One is, I think it's important to always think about policy as not just formalized legislative process, but also achieved through informal means, through people's daily living and being, and how we can determine course of action through that. And I think we heard some examples in the other cases. The other thing is about overcoming modernization for us is about collapsing these dichotomies, not just rural and urban, mountain versus flat, but getting people together around common interest and purposes. Modernization in many ways created the producer and the consumer and distanced them through expert technology, through commodification, et cetera. So how do we collapse that? And embracing food as an existing resource for promoting some of this change, learning to accommodate growth. And this is where I think we failed. And there's a lot to talk about this. Growth both in diversification. In that video, you saw urban people who started doing bioconstruction and making soaps and a whole bunch of new initiatives that we were incapable of supporting. And they've kind of lost interest in us. and also just mere growth. Having the tools to integrate new arrivals and put them to work, as sharing the identity, becoming part of the movement, giving them a productive role. That's been very challenging for us because many of us are volunteers, and it was well beyond our capabilities as volunteers and not having dedicated resources to put to bear on supporting these new arrivals. So we think it's important to continually embrace these synergies, to understand and appreciate difference, and that's also a problem we have right now, these forms of racism and biases towards wealthy people, for example, are always emerging, and they're ugly head and preventing us from working together. We need to continually manage that and helping people to find common understanding and understand how we can work together, and building these organizational skills, decentralized leadership, not centralizing the leadership, and helping people solve problems and to mobilize their own resources and giving them voice and support when they need it. And I'll end with that. Thank you. There we go. Yep.
Thank you very much, Steve. Let me see if there is one or two questions in the chat for you.
Okay, so how affordable is alternative food networks as compared to traditional, I'm sorry, I've got a block here, ones in Ecuador? Thank you. So they have to become affordable. They're not always affordable at the beginning, but they have to somehow become affordable. When I say alternative food networks, for us, that can be maternal lactation groups. That can be a fair, that can be a store, that can be a restaurant. So for us, it's sort of these enterprises that are emerging on the margins of modernization and creating new possibilities for human health, for social equity, for environmental rehabilitation. And so they're much beyond fairs. But many times in the beginning, they are not economic, right? They're kind of tied into the modern matrix, and they have to break out of that. And somehow we have to become economic. They're more than economic, right? They're generating other forms of value. Non-currency value. So how can you help them survive so that they can grow and become economic is a huge challenge.
Many thanks. And sorry, I don't, Susan, did you have another question? I see there are two questions.
There's rather a comment that that compared to mountain products are cleaner with less residues of toxics or pesticides than those from cities. It's rather a comment than a question. I'm sorry about that. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much to all our panelists. And now, I don't know if Susan, you could please share the presentation. We will unfortunately not have the time to work in groups, but we still wanted to ask you a question, the audience. We had now 4 very, very different cases, all very rich in learnings and recommendations. So what inspired you the most from what you heard in the presentations? If you could please go to the Mentimeter. It is also in the chat. And respond to this question from your perspective, your part of the world, your experiences. Just wait for an additional couple of minutes if you need to add something else. Exactly. If you have some difficulty accessing the Mentimeter, you can also add your ideas in the chat and we will add them for you. Okay, thank you very much. Many ideas, but we clearly see a very important word in the middle, participation. And this strikes me, and I think is something in common that we found in all these cases, the importance of people and of collaboration and of building relationships or closing the gaps between different actors working with each other, and especially empowering participants. And we first wanted to have breakout groups to discuss and to reflect jointly on recommendations for policy and practice. We unfortunately don't have the time to do that. We didn't want to cut on all these very interesting presentations. In each of these presentations, each one of you presented some very concrete recommendations that are very valuable. So I invite also the audience to have a look then at in the end, at our blog post, which we will prepare with the links to the recordings and to the resources and the videos to look at this rich material. But if I may try now to summarize some of the key ideas, or maybe some of the common ideas that we can get out of these very, very different cases, different realities in different parts of the world. I think we saw that we all saw in different contexts how different forms of social innovation can have positive impacts. And social innovation was here understood as new forms of cooperation of individual or organizations that can lead to new ideas. And we saw how they can have positive impacts on society, on the quality of life of people, but also on power relations and questions of capacities and identity. First of all, in some cases, we saw how these social innovations can directly lead to the development or the strengthening of new products and have a direct impact on livelihoods. And we saw this with the case in Georgia, but also at the territorial level with the case of the 100% Val Poschiavo initiative in the Swiss Alps. In the case of Nepal, we also saw how this can actually maybe not lead to increased income, but at least to reduce the cost or to reduce the vulnerability and the economic vulnerability of, in that case, specifically of left behind women in migrant households. An important lesson learned beyond this economic development is how the social innovation in all these different cases help to build resilience, be it through growth independence, and there's a huge interesting discussion that would that could lead to a whole talk by itself on growth independence and accommodating growth. We saw this both in the Alps and in Ecuador, but also resilience in terms of adaptation. And this was striking with the case of Nepal, and resilience to floods, but also to response to COVID with the example of Ecuador, which is probably also the case in the other cases. And third, beyond economic development and resilience, one important lesson which I got from all these cases is the development of this social capital, the nurturing of this social capital, be it through developing capacities, through learning, but also empowerment, and how much this can be enhanced when it's linked to also cultural and natural identity. And I loved the case of the Georgia Craft Heritage Association in this regard, but also in terms of nurturing and building these new relationships and collaborations and closing these gaps between different actors. So with these words, of course, I cannot do justice to all the talks in a few words. I would really like to invite you to continue discussing, maybe bilaterally, and especially to join us in our upcoming MRD talks. Next one will most probably be during the second half of July. We will shortly announce it. We have a surprise topic for you. And I would like to thank all the participants, in particular the panelists, for your time. You're all located in very different time zones, which are most of them not very convenient, but you are really eager and to participate, and we thank you for having accepted our invitation. As I mentioned before, all the key insights from this talk, the recordings, but also some key resources by the panelists will be uploaded on a webpage. You will receive an email with all this information when it's ready in the coming days. And maybe before closing the event, I would like to ask you, before leaving the talk, if you could answer to a very short survey that we have. So this is still a pilot format. These MRD talks is only our third one, and we're really interested in having your feedback and seeing how we can improve them in the future. So thank you very much for your participation.